Henry could have been a carrier of the infection, passed it on to his wives through sex, who then in turn passed it on to their children without anybody knowing about it.
After 500 years, scientists have finally uncovered the shocking truth about King Henry VIII's death. DNA evidence revealed his body carried two rare genetic disorders that destroyed his mind, body, and heirs. Could this explain his madness and cruelty? Was the real curse in his blood all along? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this revelation. The Golden Prince and the Hidden Curse. When Henry VIII became king at the young age of 17 in the year 1509, England believed it had been blessed with a golden prince. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, with bright red hair and the kind of confidence that made people adore him instantly. He was handsome, athletic, and intelligent, a true symbol of youth and promise. The people saw in him a new beginning, one that could finally lift England into an age of peace and prosperity. He wasn't just a king, he was the hope of a nation. At his coronation, the streets of London shimmered with color and cheer. Bells rang out, banners fluttered in the wind, and citizens shouted his name with joy. The atmosphere was alive with excitement, as though the entire kingdom had turned its gaze toward a brighter future. Henry was everything a monarch was supposed to be: charming, educated, and powerful. He could sing, dance, ride horses, and speak several languages. He was strong and skilled in the jousting field, often seen competing fearlessly and winning the admiration of nobles and commoners alike. In his early years, his energy seemed endless. Courtiers spoke of how he would rise early in the morning to hunt, then spend hours at sport or study. He loved music and theology as much as he loved armor and tournaments. He was a man of both mind and might, and to those around him, it seemed as though nothing could ever go wrong. His laughter filled the royal halls, and his dazzling smile gave reassurance that this young ruler would lead with fairness and strength. But hidden behind that bright image was something far more troubling, something that no one could see. Buried deep within his blood lay a silent enemy, a genetic shadow that would one day awaken and change everything. It was a mystery no one could name, a curse that waited quietly, patient and unseen. To the people, Henry appeared invincible, but the truth was far more fragile. As the years passed, the perfect prince began to show signs that puzzled those closest to him. At first they were small, flashes of temper, strange moods, bursts of suspicion. No one thought much of it, dismissing it as the natural stress of ruling a kingdom. Yet those moments would later be seen as the first cracks in the golden image. The radiant king who once inspired admiration would become a man ruled by paranoia, anger, and cruelty. Historians have long wondered what caused this transformation. How did the beloved Prince of Promise become the feared tyrant whose very name filled courtiers with dread? Was it the pressure of the crown, or had something within him been broken long before anyone noticed? Centuries later, modern science would begin to piece together the truth. DNA research suggested that Henry may have carried a genetic disorder, one capable of causing madness, physical pain, and infertility. It was a cruel twist of fate that the same blood which gave him royal power also carried the seeds of his destruction. His mind, once sharp and curious, would darken. His body, once strong and lively, would fail him. England's shining star would become its darkest shadow. The man who once promised greatness would leave behind a kingdom divided and broken. What no one could see on the day of his coronation was that the young king's greatest enemy was not a rival nation or a rebellious noble, it was within himself. And as this hidden curse slowly began to show its face, it would take only one tragic accident to awaken it completely. The next chapter unfolds at Greenwich Palace, where a moment of triumph would turn into disaster, and the fall of a king would begin. The accident that changed a kingdom. It was a cold morning on January 24th, 1536, at Greenwich Palace. The air buzzed with excitement as King Henry VIII prepared for a jousting match. The crowds waited eagerly to see their king, still proud, still powerful, dressed in full armor, gleaming beneath the winter sun. Jousting was Henry's favorite sport, the one place where he could feel like the glorious young prince he once was. But that day, fate had other plans. The sound of hooves thundered across the field as Henry lowered his lance, charging with all his might. The crowd roared in excitement. Then, In a sudden and horrifying moment, his horse stumbled. In an instant, the great king was thrown violently to the ground, his massive armor trapping him beneath the animal's weight. The field fell silent. Gasps filled the air as soldiers and courtiers rushed forward. The king, their king, lay motionless. He did not wake for 2 long hours. Those who surrounded him feared the worst. Some wept openly, believing the Tudor line would end that very day. When he finally regained consciousness, he was dazed and pale, unable to stand without help. The accident had crushed more than just his body. It had shaken the very heart of England. Though his life was spared, something deep within him had changed forever. In the days that followed, the once energetic king became haunted by pain and darkness. He could no longer walk as freely as before. His legs ached constantly, and soon a terrible ulcer began to form, one that never healed. The smell of it filled the royal chambers, a constant reminder of his suffering. The proud and graceful Henry became short-tempered, violent, and unpredictable. Courtiers began to whisper that the accident had cursed him, that it had released something dark within his mind. Only 11 days after the fall, Queen Anne Boleyn miscarried a male child. It was a devastating loss, both personal and political. Many said Henry's anger and despair only deepened after that day. The man who once laughed easily now shouted in fury. His once curious eyes grew cold and suspicious. He became a ruler driven by fear and rage, a man who trusted no one, not even his own wife. That tragic day in the jousting yard marked the beginning of his physical and mental decline. His once golden body grew heavier, his spirit darker. But the accident itself was not the only cause. It had only awakened something that had been waiting in silence, the hidden curse within his blood. From that moment forward, Henry's reign would change forever. England's golden age faded, replaced by a time of executions, betrayals, and lost love. But how deep did the madness go? In the next chapter, the shadow spreads, and the curse begins to consume not only the king, but everyone who dared to love him. The curse, in his blood. For centuries, historians searched for an answer to the question that haunted the story of King Henry VIII. Why did nearly all his children pass away before birth? Why did his wives suffer repeated miscarriages, while the few who gave him healthy daughters could never bear him a son who survived? In the year 2011, bioarchaeologists Kyra Kramer and Katrina Whitley offered a revelation that changed everything. Their study suggested that Henry carried something hidden deep within his blood, the Kell-positive antigen. To most people, blood is simply the lifeline of the body, but within it lie tiny codes that decide how it reacts with another person's. The Kell system is one of these blood group patterns, and when mismatched, it can be deadly for unborn children. If a father is Kell-positive and a mother is Kell-negative, their first child may survive without trouble. But during that first pregnancy, the mother's body learns to recognize the Kell antigen as something foreign. When she conceives again, her immune system begins to attack the baby's red blood cells, mistaking them for invaders. The result is tragic: miscarriage, stillbirth, or a baby too weak to live. This discovery brought heartbreaking clarity to the pattern that followed Henry's life. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, lost one baby after another. She endured heartbreak after heartbreak, stillborn sons, tiny infants who lived only hours, and brief glimmers of hope that quickly faded. Only one child, a girl named Mary, managed to survive into adulthood. It was a cruel fate that left Henry longing for a male heir and convinced that God had cursed his marriage. When Anne Boleyn entered his life, Henry believed she was the answer to his prayers. Their passion was fierce, and when Anne gave birth to a healthy daughter, Elizabeth, the king's joy was unbounded. Yet his hope would soon turn to despair. Anne's next pregnancies ended in loss, one miscarriage after another, with the most devastating being the loss of a male child in 1536, soon after Henry's terrible jousting accident. What no one understood was that these losses followed a scientific pattern, not a divine one. It wasn't God's anger or witchcraft that stole Henry's heirs, it was his own blood. The Kell-positive antigen silently waged war against his children before they ever drew breath. Each time he tried to build his legacy through another woman, the same invisible battle destroyed it. Imagine the emotional toll this would have taken. Each miscarriage was not just a personal loss, but a national tragedy. Every time a baby passed away, the king's hope for stability and the Tudor name faded with it. With each failure, Henry's heart grew darker. His once gentle nature hardened into suspicion and rage. He accused his wives of betrayal, blamed God for injustice, and sought comfort in new marriages, desperate to break a curse he did not understand. Behind closed doors, he must have felt haunted, a man blessed with power but cursed by his own body. The same blood that made him royal was also the reason his dynasty teetered on the edge of collapse. He could command armies and crush enemies, yet he could not command life within his own family. That quiet agony twisted him from within, driving him to decisions that stained his reign with tragedy. When historians looked back through the centuries, they once believed Henry's story was one of pride, cruelty, and sin. But modern science revealed something far more human. A man trapped in the prison of his own biology, punished for something he never knew existed. His fury and fear were the echoes of a father's grief, a husband's confusion, and a ruler's desperation. This revelation explained not only the heartbreak of his marriages, but also the roots of the madness that followed. Because the curse did not stop with his children, it began to consume Henry himself. In the next chapter, the truth deepens. The same blood that destroyed his heirs would begin to destroy his body and mind, as another hidden disorder silently tightened its grip on the king. The MacLeod syndrome theory. If the Kell-positive antigen explained the death of Henry's children, then another hidden force within his blood explained the death of his mind. Scientists now believe that Henry VIII suffered from a rare genetic condition called MacLeod syndrome, a disorder that strikes the heart, muscles, and brain. It is carried on the X chromosome, meaning it passes quietly through generations until one unlucky person inherits the full burden. MacLeod syndrome reveals itself slowly. It begins with fatigue and weakness in the muscles, spreading to the heart and nerves. Over time, it can change a person's mood, memory, and behavior. It brings paranoia, bursts of anger, and deep confusion. To those living in the 16th century, these symptoms would have seemed like madness or punishment from God. But in truth, they were the results of a brain slowly being damaged by its own blood. The signs began to show after the jousting accident of 1536. Henry, once the very image of health and charm, started to change in ways no one could explain. His body swelled with weight, his leg ulcers festered endlessly, and his once quick mind became clouded with suspicion. The proud king, who had once debated scholars and poets, now raged at imagined enemies. Those who had known the Golden Prince no longer recognized him. He grew cruel, unpredictable, and often terrifying. His temper became explosive, and his decisions deadly. Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom he had broken his first marriage, was accused of betrayal and executed without mercy. His friend and advisor, Thomas More, met the same fate. Even loyal servants lived in fear, never knowing when the king's shifting moods would turn against them. What had once been a warm heart grew cold and distant. Courtiers whispered that the king was cursed, that the devil had entered his soul. In truth, his brain was under siege from within, damaged by MacLeod syndrome. His nervous system weakened, his circulation worsened, and the constant pain from his legs drove him deeper into fury. This condition also attacked his heart, making him prone to exhaustion and shortness of breath. His once endless energy was gone. He spent his final years surrounded by fear, food, and fading memories. But what must it have felt like for him to sense his own decline and not understand it? Did he ever wonder why his mind betrayed him? Did he think God had turned against him for his sins, when in truth it was his own DNA writing his fate? In a world without medicine or knowledge of genetics, such suffering could only be seen as divine punishment. But the truth was far more tragic. Henry was not just a tyrant, he was a victim of his own blood. His rage, paranoia, and cruelty were symptoms of a disease no one could name. His fall from glory was not simply a story of power and pride, but of illness and ignorance. By the time he reached his 50s, the once golden prince had become unrecognizable, broken in body, tormented in mind, and haunted by ghosts of the children he had lost. The same bloodline that had made him king was the very thing that doomed him. But the story does not end with his death. In the next chapter, we uncover how Henry's hidden curse continued to echo through generations, shaping the fate of his surviving children and changing the future of England forever. The body that betrayed the king. As the years passed, King Henry VIII's once proud body became a prison. The tall, athletic young man who had dazzled England with his energy and grace was gone. In his place stood a broken giant, swollen with weight and crippled by pain. By the time he reached his late 40s, Henry weighed nearly 400 pounds. He could no longer mount a horse or climb a flight of stairs. His servants carried him from room to room, lifting his enormous frame with mechanical hoists and padded chairs. The great Renaissance king, who had once raced through tournaments, now struggled to move even a few steps. His legs, once strong and admired, became his worst torment. Deep ulcers spread across them, open wounds that refused to heal. The stench of decay followed him wherever he went, filling chambers with a sickly, heavy air that no perfume could disguise. At times, his servants gagged from the smell, yet none dared complain. They dressed his sores with cloth soaked in wine and vinegar, but the pain only worsened. The infection burrowed deep into the flesh, swelling his legs until his skin cracked. Each step became torture, each night a sleepless battle against agony. The treatments of his time were as cruel as the disease itself. Royal physicians used red-hot irons to cauterize the ulcers, burning away rotting tissue in a desperate attempt to stop the spread. When that failed, they sliced into the sores to drain them, their knives cutting through tender flesh. Sometimes they packed the wounds with herbs or wrapped them in thick poultices, hoping to draw out the poison. Nothing worked. Instead, the wounds grew worse, the smell stronger, and the pain unbearable. Henry's immense size made healing nearly impossible. His blood no longer flowed freely through his body. His heart strained to push it through layers of fat. The lack of circulation slowed the healing process, while his weakened muscles wasted away under the weight they could no longer support. Each day he sank deeper into the grip of his illness. Food, once a joy, became both comfort and curse. He ate to escape the pain, yet every feast made his suffering greater. It was a vicious cycle. Pain led him to eat more, and eating more led to even greater pain. The royal kitchens continued to prepare endless courses of roasted meats, rich pastries, and spiced wine. To stop eating would have been seen as weakness, and Henry refused to show weakness before anyone. The banquets continued, the music played, and the courtiers smiled, all while their king's body quietly collapsed under the weight of his pride. Medicine during the Renaissance was powerless against such suffering. Physicians still believed that sickness was caused by an imbalance of bodily humors. They tightened his bandages to stimulate circulation, not realizing they were cutting off the very blood flow his body needed. They prescribed bleeding and purging, weakening him further. Henry's swollen body became a battlefield between ignorance and pain. In those days, obesity was not viewed as a disease. Instead, it was seen as a sign of wealth and strength, proof that a man had more than enough to eat while others starved. To many, the king's size represented power and authority, but in truth it was taking his life. His enormous body trapped heat, worsened infections, and made movement nearly impossible. Every day was a reminder that his once perfect frame had turned against him. As his physical suffering grew, so did his anger. He became quick to lash out, terrifying even his closest advisors. Courtiers who once sought his favor now avoided his presence, fearing his wrath and the smell that filled his chambers. Even his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, found it difficult to approach him. The father they had once looked to for love now frightened them with his unpredictable moods and wounded pride. Henry's court, once filled with music and laughter, turned silent. His grand halls became places of fear and whispers. His body had betrayed him, but his mind refused to accept defeat. He dressed in fine clothes and jewels to mask his decay, ordering paintings to show him as the strong king he had once been. But behind the embroidered robes, the truth was plain. England's mighty ruler was dying slowly, consumed by his own flesh. In the next chapter, that slow decay reaches its final stage. The king who had once ruled with unmatched power faces his last days, surrounded by fear, sickness, and the shadow of a collapsing empire. The weight of a dying empire. In the final years of his life, King Henry VIII was no longer a ruler of flesh and blood, but a shell of the man he had been. His once golden hair had turned white and thin. His swollen face was pale, and his body was so bloated that even sitting upright became a challenge. Every breath was a battle. His legs were wrapped in thick bandages, leaking fluid that stained his clothes and bed. Servants worked in shifts to lift and clean him, their faces tight with fear and pity. The ulcers that had tormented him for years grew deeper, festering until the infection spread through his bloodstream. His heart struggled under the weight of his enormous frame. His kidneys weakened, and his body began to retain fluid. His hands and feet swelled painfully, his skin cracked, and his eyes grew dull with exhaustion. Some historians believe he suffered from heart failure, diabetes, and kidney disease, all born from years of strain and neglect. But the physical pain was only half the story. Inside his mind, darkness took over. The once charming, confident king had become paranoid and delusional. He trusted no one. He saw betrayal everywhere, in his advisors, his family, even in his own daughters. His temper erupted without warning, and his fits of rage terrified everyone around him. Between outbursts came moments of deep despair, when he wept over his sins and feared eternal punishment. His court became a place of quiet dread. Ministers walked on tiptoe, afraid to speak the wrong word. Messages were whispered instead of spoken aloud. No one dared challenge his decisions, even when they made no sense. The empire he had built on power and fear now trembled at the sight of his weakness. England was changing, its people restless, its politics unstable. And at the heart of it all lay a dying king, surrounded by wealth but stripped of peace. In January of 1547, the end finally came. Henry was confined to his bed at Whitehall Palace, his body swollen and failing. Fever set in, his wounds oozing and his heart faltering. The pain was constant and his breath came in short, shallow gasps. Priests were called to his side, and even they hesitated, afraid of angering him in his final hours. But Henry knew the truth. His time had come. As dawn approached, his strength faded. The man who had once ruled with unmatched might could barely speak. His massive frame trembled with each breath until, at last, it stopped. The great King of England was dead. The room fell silent, broken only by the soft sounds of servants weeping and the heavy thud of his final exhale. Those who stood beside his bed stared in disbelief. The powerful figure who had changed the course of history was now only a body, lifeless, pale, and enormous. Moving him was a dreadful task. It took several men to lift him from the bed, his corpse heavy with years of indulgence and disease. The once golden prince who had embodied England's future had become a symbol of its pain. Outside the palace walls, word of his death spread quickly. Some mourned, others felt relief, but all knew they had witnessed the end of an era. The irony was bitter. The king who had sacrificed everything to secure his dynasty had nearly destroyed it. His desperate quest for a son had left a trail of blood, and his illness had stripped away his humanity. Yet even in death, his presence lingered. The empire he built trembled, but survived through the children he had once feared to trust. His daughter Mary would rule with fire, and Elizabeth would rise to restore the glory he had lost. But before England could rise again, one final mystery would remain. How could a man so powerful be undone by his own blood? In the next chapter, we uncover the legacy of the king's hidden curse and how it shaped the destiny of those who came after him. A monster or a victim? Centuries after the death of Henry VIII, the world still whispers his name with both awe and horror. For generations, he was remembered as the tyrant king who turned his back on the church, destroyed his wives, and bathed his court in fear. Yet as modern science peeled back the layers of legend, it revealed something far more complex. The man once seen as a monster might have been, in truth, a victim of his own biology. The myths, curses, and divine punishments once attached to him began to crumble when scientists uncovered the secrets hidden within his blood. In the year 2011, a groundbreaking study led by bioarchaeologists Kyra Kramer and Katrina Whitley changed how historians looked at Henry's life. Their research pointed to two rare genetic conditions, the Kell-positive blood antigen and McLeod syndrome, that could explain the physical and mental torment that shaped his reign. These were not the marks of sin or madness, but the cruel inheritance of his DNA. For the first time in history, science gave the Tudor king a new kind of autopsy, one that examined not his flesh, but his bloodline. Before this discovery, historians struggled to make sense of his decline. Some blamed syphilis, others suspected diabetes, and a few suggested Cushing's disease. Yet none of these theories fit the timeline of his suffering. Henry's symptoms, his failing fertility, unpredictable rages, mental confusion, and decaying body, began too early and progressed too precisely to match any of those illnesses. The truth, as the DNA evidence suggests, was written in his genes from birth. His downfall was not punishment from heaven, but a betrayal from within. The Kell antigen theory explained the heartbreak that haunted his marriages. Every time a Kell-positive father conceived a child with a Kell-negative mother, the mother's body learned to attack future Kell-positive babies as if they were invaders. Henry's blood, carrying that fatal antigen, turned each of his wives into unwilling enemies of their own children. Catherine of Aragon's endless miscarriages, Anne Boleyn's failed pregnancies after Elizabeth, and Jane Seymour's tragic death after giving birth all followed the cruel logic of biology. It was not witchcraft or God's wrath. It was Henry's blood silently waging war on his heirs. The MacLeod syndrome theory added another layer to the tragedy. This genetic disorder attacked not only the muscles and heart, but also the mind. It explained why the young athletic prince who had once charmed Europe transformed into a suspicious, violent, and paranoid man after his 40th year. His temper grew uncontrollable, his body heavy and weak, his thoughts dark and erratic. MacLeod syndrome often strikes later in life, turning brilliance into confusion and kindness into cruelty. The disease could turn even a golden king into a shadow of himself. When these two conditions are placed side by side, they form a haunting portrait of Henry's life, a man doomed from the start by the very blood that made him royal. Every decision, every betrayal, and every execution might have been driven not by pure malice, but by pain, fear, and the slow collapse of his body and mind. His story becomes less about tyranny and more about tragedy, a reminder that even those who seem most powerful can be prisoners of their own flesh. But this revelation raises a difficult question. If Henry's cruelty came from his DNA, does it change how history should judge him? Should we see him as a monster who destroyed lives for pride and greed, or as a man crushed under the weight of his own biology? Science forces us to look deeper, beyond the crown, beyond the myths, and see the fragile human beneath. Perhaps his rage was not the voice of a tyrant, but the cry of a man who did not understand what was happening to him. The story closes with a chilling realization. Henry's greatest enemy was never his wives, his rivals, or the church. It was his own blood. His genes wrote the tragedy that no one could see, the unseen script that guided every heartbreak, every death, every act of cruelty. As one might say, the truth was in his blood all along. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.